All right. Hello, Mixed Asian Media Festival. Welcome to this incredible session, Grant Writing and Fundraising for Documentary. This session is co-presented by Video Consortium. My name is Michaela Ternasky-Holland. I am the Mixed Asian Media Festival's creative producer. And with me is Heidi Reinberg. Before we get into our session, I just want to say that I use the pronouns that are she, her, and I'm currently unseated on the land. I'm currently on the unceded lands of the Lenape and Canarsie people. I'm a mixed race woman with almond shaped eyes, medium brown skin, black hair. I'm currently wearing a denim jacket, similar to my colleague Heidi. Mine's a little bit lighter. Behind me is a white background with a yellow painting. And I want to just hand it over to Heidi to also give a quick introduction of themselves and what they look like. And then we will jump into Heidi's incredible background, their bio, etc., etc., etc. So go ahead and take the mic, Heidi.
Hi, everybody. I'm so excited to be here tonight. My name is Heidi Reinberg, and I'm a executive producer. My company is Necessary Pictures. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I too am coming from the ancestral lands of the Lenape people. I too am wearing denim. I also have very dark hair, although unlike Michaela, mine is as short as it can be without shaving it all off. And I'm wearing tortoiseshell glasses, and I'm sitting in front of a bunch of cookbooks, which is my passion. Other than documentaries, of course.
It almost made me want to start asking you about cooking, but I know we don't have a whole lot of time, and you have a
session.
Yeah, it's a different session. So for those of you who don't know, Heidi Reinberg recently served as the consulting producer on the documentary Born to Be, which premiered at 2019 New York Film Festival, before being released theatrically by Kino Lorber. Kino Lorber, thank you, and being nominated for 2 Emmys. Prior to that, she produced 93 Queen, a co-production with ITVS Art, SWR, and Yes Docu. 93 Queen had its broadcast premiere on POV before heading over to HBO Max. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Previously, Reinberg worked with the Oscar-winning Ross Kaufman and award-winning directors Mai Iskander and Jeremiah Zager. Did I say those names correctly, Heidi?
Good enough. Yeah.
Her work has been supported by the Sundance Documentary Institute, the Ford Foundation, the National Endowment for the Humanities, XTR, the Tribeca Film Institute, Catapult Film Fund, Fork Films, NYSCA, the IDA, the Economic Hardship Reporting Project, and the Austin Film Society. She is a frequent panelist on the subject of grant writing, fundraising, project development, and pitching. Reinberg is a member of the Documentary Producers Alliance and serving as a member of the body's structural working group. So, thank you again, Heidi, for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. I know I just said a whole lot of words that mean a whole lot of things to different people. But I would love to hear from your own, perspective, your own point of view, your own words, what it is that makes you sort of like that important knowledge base when it comes to something so key as fundraising and grant writing, especially for people in the independent film world.
Well, I can confidently say I've gotten pretty much every grant out there that one can get. And I actually do have a really good idea of the way the whole thing works. The last 2 projects that I've worked on, I've worked on a lot of projects right now that had everything going for them. So I know what it's like to have everything going for a project, whether that's, having CAA repping it, or whether, going through IFP, or which is now Gotham Week, being one of the what do I call it, the pretty girls, being one of the pretty girls at those, and still having to work to get funding. So I do feel like I know what a good proposal looks like. I know how hard it is. I know what the cycle looks like. And it it's never easy. Even it's not easy for anybody to get funding. It's not easy, it's just not, whether you know what you're doing or not what you're doing. But I kind of feel like I have a pretty good idea of what that looks like right now.
That totally makes sense. So now that we've established, you, can we take it a few steps backwards and
Uh-huh.
talk a little bit about your journey into filmmaking, how you started in filmmaking? If you had a classic Marvel origin, we are very familiar with those movies by this point. If you had one of those films made about you and your superpower, what would be like the key scenes? What would be the key moments? What would be some of your larger conflicts that kind of created you into the superhero you are today?
Gosh, I don't consider myself a superhero, so let me think on that. I just got into producing. Like I took a very circuitous route into and are the people on the call right now, are they doc funders or is it a mix of fiction and nonfiction?
Yeah, it's probably like, just so you know, our Manfest attendees, up and coming independent filmmakers, both in the fiction and nonfiction world, but we did title this more specific to docs. So we're probably,
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you for that context. I just started producing docs. I mean, I came to New York City out of college and I worked in the fashion industry and I was doing that for a very long time. My first bio was like Heidi Reinberg took a circuitous route into the documentary space. So I started in fashion, ended up volunteering a lot with a group called New York Cares. Got more into nonprofit. Um, Thought somebody should make a film about AIDS volunteerism, and that's how I got into documentary. I literally just said, "Okay, I'm going to make a film about this." I know about funding. I know about nonprofit funding because of my volunteer work, and I literally just the what is it? The artist's way: leap in the net will appear. So that's literally how I got into producing. And I don't think one needs to go to film school to be a producer. You just have to have the courage and the confidence to and the willingness to take on, what is an incredibly difficult journey. But just because you didn't go to film school doesn't mean you can't produce films. Like you should absolutely. I believe in producer's brain, which is the way that you work. You look at things, which is short term versus long term, which is that you know how to talk to people and get them to open their wallets. And first and foremost, you know how to convey what it is about your film that you need to convey to get people to fund it.
I feel like you just dropped some little nuggets, so I would love to kind of jump into those nuggets. So
Go for it.
talking about, well, you said something that I feel like most people, unless you want to be kind of labeled as a salesperson, they're not really comfortable talking about, and that is, how do you get people to open their wallets, right? I feel personally, and I'm going to speak from my perspective as a woman who was raised, as a second generation immigrant, as a woman of color, we are very much told to believe that money is implicit to the value we have in the world. And so if you're valuable to the world, then people give you money. And if you feel like you're not very valuable, you're not given money. And we're also kind of brought up to believe like we shouldn't be asking for too much. We shouldn't be asking for too much money. We shouldn't be asking for too much time, too much resources. We should just be able to figure it out on our own. And I know, speaking from my perspective, as when I graduated, not necessarily from film school, but from journalism school, and I started to move into filmmaking and was really trying to hustle and find funding, it was very difficult. And I felt like I was working in a very exhaustive solo silo. So yeah, I would love to like just hear a little bit about your perspective if someone like me was coming to you.
Well, first of all, I don't think that that's all. We all have our own relationships with money and talking about money, and a lot of that comes from our families. I have a terrible relationship with money coming from my family. Um, And then there's other people like Geraldine White Dreyfus who founded Impact Partners with Dan Kogan, who can, like, she's the one person I go to when I'm like, oh, she can get somebody to write a check tomorrow when I need a check. You know, like I'm not always comfortable talking to people of wealth because it's a different, like I was recently trying to raise money to get Afghan refugees over here, and it was because I had friends who were working on that and trying to get people to open their wallets for that. But I also knew what the problems were, which is like, how do you know these people are legit? How do you know they're just not taking their money? And that was all the stuff that was talking about with them. So just let's stipulate that not everybody has their own relationship with money. But what I think is paramount, whatever your relationship with money is being able to tell the story of your film. Like if you learn to tell the story of your film and the right way to do that, like that's what's going to get people to open their wallets, whether it's an investor or whether it's a film funder. And that's what I think people don't get their heads around. And one of the biggest mistakes people make is they just talk and talk and talk and talk and talk, and they keep, it's kind of what I'm doing right now, but they consider it a monologue versus a dialogue. And really, if it takes so much pressure off, if you consider it a conversation rather than getting them to fund your film.
And I think that's so key to making that connection, right? Because, you think about, what do you spend money on? You spend money on yourself, but you also spend money on friends, on family, on people that you feel like you can trust and rely on. And I think one thing I feel like I've learned is it's building that relationship with a funder. It's building that reliability as you're, even within the first 5 minutes of meeting them, right? It goes as far as, like, if they hand you a business card and they ask you to follow up, you follow up, right? Or if you hand them a business card and they email you, you email them back right away. Like, those are, I feel like, little things that I have learned being in the industry that kind of stand out, because that proves already you're someone who follows through. That proves already you're someone who can make that connection. What about when we start looking at grant writing, when it's less about that human connection and less about people being face to face and being able to kind of smile and laugh and have a moment of networking? I know that sometimes can be a weird word, but how do you convey all that networking, or how do you convey the humanness of the creator, the humanness of the story through the written word, through a grant application?
Well, first of all, one of the things, just like piggybacking off of what you just said, again, and this is where I go back to, people just have this propensity to talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. And if you haven't, what you want to create is something, and this is like when you're sending somebody a written material or a budget, is that you want them to ask for the next thing. You want to get them over this first hurdle, right? So the first hurdle is always going to be a log line. Now with the log line, there's log lines that look great written, and then there's log lines, but they don't work when you say them. People tend to regurgitate. Like one of my first films that I did, my first film with Cynthia Wade. What was it? It was called Grist for the Mill. And this is when everybody was doing like postcards at IFP Market, because we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have computers. But our log line was, it's about the meaning of family in the wake of divorce. And that sounds like really awesome when it's on a postcard, because we didn't have email back then. But when you say it, it sounds really stilted. It sounds like something you memorize. It's got no emotion. It's got no passion. It's got nothing behind it. It's great log line. But you have to differentiate between, and we all know our films. We can talk about our films. So that's like what you need to like really lean into. And the best piece of advice I can give everybody is to shut up. Like, say one thing, like one sentence, and this is where I go back to what I said about it's a dialogue as opposed to a monologue. Let them respond to you. And it's just like doing an interview with somebody in a documentary. They respond to me, I respond back to what they're saying to me. And then I'm having a conversation about the film and what the film is. It's not just me, like, just throwing a bunch of, excuse my language, shit at them. And so that's the biggest way you like, the biggest thing you can do is just like whatever you need to do to build your confidence, to just talk about your film as if you're having a conversation with a friend. And maybe the easiest way to think about it is to think about, how do you talk about films that you've seen in the theater? If you're talking about films that you've seen in the theater, how do you talk to friends about those? That's kind of the way you want to treat it. I'm always looking for projects that I can sell off of one page, or I've even been pitching around. I even was pitching around to projects during COVID that I sold off literally a link to an article in the High Country News. That it's like, you read this article and I'm just like, of course you want to fund this HBO. Who wouldn't want to fund this? So I think, and many times people put so much more weight behind talking about their films than is actually just talk about the films. You know your subject, you know your film.
So it felt to me like that sort of approach is like what you were hinting at before with the producer mentality, right? Like you were saying, going into this with a producer mentality. So it's not diluting the content by serving it all at once, but it's sort of giving it, receiving, giving it, receiving. So that first part of that producer mentality, like you said, the log line, the hook, that article, what would be that next step after that? I mean, I think I hesitate to say we're probably 3 steps away from the treatment or death or pitch, right? But I want to know from your perspective, what would be sort of a log line? Okay, great, I'm interested in learning more. Then, like, what would be sort of that next thing? The short description, the paragraph?
I don't think it's the way the conversations work. It's like, what are they asking you questions about? And then you're bouncing off of the questions. It's not like, as much as I always say we're selling widgets here, and we are, it's selling something. But I think if you if you listen to them and then you are responding to their questions and what they're saying versus thinking of the next thing that you're going to say to them, in terms of like, okay, I get them a long line. Now what am I going to do? The next synopsis. Let them ask the questions. Say stuff that's going to elicit questions and find out what they're interested in, and listen to what's interesting them and what you're talking about. Because they may be interested in, oh, wow, that's like really, that sounds so, like I'm consulting on a film about the Berrigans right now, we're a group of Jesuit priests, 2 Jesuit priests, one of whom married a nun back in the 60s, and they got excommunicated, and they spent the next 50 years of their life being anti-war activists. And that's relevant now because there's so much activism going on, and these folks were doing it at a time when there weren't any cell phones and weren't any computers, and they got 10,000 people out to march on the Pentagon. So there's always something, if you get out of your brain that's why I say, like, regurgitating, your subject, but the point at which you start regurgitating a proposal or a treatment, like, you'll follow up with that. But the point at which you just start regurgitating what's in your brain versus listening to what people are saying or asking about and what they're interested in, then you've lost. Because they're just like, they're going to move on to the next thing. And they're just literally trying to think, how do I get out of here? So as a as a salesperson, if that's what I'm doing, then I make a sale when I listen to what is of interest to them, not what is necessarily of interest to me that I need them to know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think that's so key, right? Like you're listening to the potential funder. You're not just trying to jam pack the time you have with them, right? And that's like a scarcity mentality because the idea, it sounds to me like we are already in the room where it happens, or we're at the event, or we're somewhere on
Well,
a Zoom call, right? And
yeah,
we're
and
having that dialogue.
that's a really good point. That what you're trying to do is to get in the room. So even like the first contact with somebody is what's going to get me in the room. I always say, and we'll share my development primer at the end of this, but people can't absorb more than 3 to 5 points. Whether this is a fictional project or a nonfiction project, people cannot absorb when they're reading something. And I would say this to everything on this call. What you want is for somebody to actually be able to look at your treatment or your proposal or your deck, to read it and look up and be able to talk about it, and for them to be able to say what this film is about. They can't absorb more than 3 to 5 characters, and I would certainly always go with 3. And all those characters need to stand for something different. Like you and your mind need to know how those characters are different. I will flat out say, when we did the 93 Queen, which is about a group of Hasidic women in Borough Park, Brooklyn, which is a Hasidic enclave, they started the country's really first all-female volunteer ambulance corps, because the volunteer ambulance corps that served that community would not allow women to join as EMTs. So I live in Brooklyn, and I see, I'm on the same subway line as Borough Park, and it was very important to me. And I worked with a modern Orthodox female director. It was her first film, but it was very important to me. I was like, I don't know how to tell Hasidic women from each other. So really describing them, like, finding 3 characters. There were more than that in the eventual film. But really saying, okay, this person stands for this, this person stands for this, this person stands for this, is super key. And most people can't like read a proposal or treatment or whatever and not have and absorb any more than that. And the other thing with that is you don't have to write like these, huge characters. Like, give me 3 lines about each character that I can absorb and I'm good. That's it.
Yes, I have to say that the projects that I have most successfully pitched and received funding for are always the projects with the least amount of text on the page.
Yes, absolutely. And the biggest thing that I see with people whether it's, if you go to the core proposal in documentary, which is what everybody's accepting now, it's like a 1 to 2 page synopsis, a 1 to 2 page topic summary. And I always encourage people to write. It's like film. It's like editing a film. You're going to go long and then you're going to edit it down. But I think it's like good to get all that stuff out of your head. But I never, my character descriptions are this long. And also, like, if you can do that, and if you could do a concise, like, what you're trying to get to in any piece of writing is essence.
Yeah.
So the essence of the character, the essence of the synopsis, and if you can do that successfully, then a funder will have, whether they're an investor or they're, again, a grantor, they will have every confidence that if you need to pivot to something else, what you're looking for. You're looking for essence.
Yeah, one of my mentors in the filmmaking industry, who, when I first met him, had just produced his first documentary feature. He said, lean it out or trim it up. But he's just always telling me, lean and trim, lean and trim. I'll send him something, whether it's an edit, I'll send him something, whether it's a proposal or a paragraph, and he'll just tell me, did you lean this out? Did you trim it up? Have you cut the fat, is what he likes to tell me. Because we do kind of start to get in our heads of selling, and writing, especially when it comes to grant writing, is all about making it this thing. But then we don't realize sometimes people can work against themselves if they
yeah, if you throw everything but the kitchen sink in there, you're dead in the water. Because if I can't make sense of it when I'm reading it, and I'm not going to go back and read it more than once, if I can't make sense of it, then you've already lost the war. So that's the biggest mistake I see people making, is throwing everything but the kitchen sink in there. And when he's talking about lean, I like the way I put it is separating the wheat from the chaff, which is exactly what you do when you're editing a film. And I also feel like editing a film is much more about what you leave out than what you actually put in. Most people think about it the other way, but what you leave out allows the stuff that you put in to shine. And to be the wheat. So, I mean, even down to Frankenbiting everything, I think the other thing that's super important that I feel like people don't think enough about is, what do you want the takeaway to be? Like, what do you want the takeaway from the film to be? I can't believe how many filmmakers I talk to who don't have an answer to that. Even filmmakers that I've talked about, even directors that I've talked about, who don't have an answer to that question. What do you want when people leave the theater? What do you want them to take away? What do you want people to take away from your synopsis? What do you want them to take away from your topic summary? What do you want them to take away from your proposal? Like, if you need to answer those questions up front. And you also need to, I think and don't apply for things, and don't send decks to people, and don't talk to people until you have your ducks in a row. Because you get very little time in the room. So before you go in the room, you better have your ducks in a row. Just because you have an opportunity to talk to somebody doesn't mean you should talk to somebody. And you should follow up with people. And my big thing is like what they don't teach you in film school, and nobody teaches you how to build relationships. But you talk to people when it's organic to talk to them, when you actually have something of value to say to them, not just because you need to follow up with them.
So when you say have your ducks in a row, can we break that point down really quick? Like, what would you consider being like your master toolkit for any? And I know you have a really handy dandy attachment, but
I have a really handy dandy attachment. I'm just gonna, you should be able to articulate it, and you should be able to like anticipate or think about every question that somebody's going to have. You should be able to articulate your 3 characters in a way, or your 5 characters if you must, and always go with an odd number. Even numbers are not satisfying for some artistic reason. I don't know why, but whether it's flower arrangements, whatever it is, like, go with an odd number. But you should be able to articulate. Don't go on a wing and a prayer that people are going to get it. The other thing that I think that I never hear anybody talk about, but having gone out in the last 2 projects that I had, these were projects that were gangbusters, that everybody was anticipating, that everybody, anybody you'd want was excited about, from Concordia to Cinetic to ITVS. And it's still, there's a group of projects ahead of you. And with 93 Queen, I think it's important to say, we got ITVS funding on our first go round. We did do that. So we're an outlier in that. But there is a group of projects that is applied once to these funds. And now they're on their second round of applying. And they've progressed. And this goes back to what I was saying about when you have something to update people on, like something organic to update people on, that's where you want to follow up with them. Because if you show progress, like you won't get it in the first round of anything, most likely. But in the second round, you want to show progress. Whatever that looks like for your particular film. And you should always keep funders, like when you have something organic to update them on, then you should update with them with that. But just be aware that you're like, I feel like in some ways funding seems to, people think it's like super easy. But and we'll share the development primer with you, but think about every single step of it. One thing that I've actually been more interested in the last couple of years that I just used to throw away was the work sample description. And I now put so much more thought into that, and because usually the question is in the core proposal. And again, same as fiction, like this is how this matches what we envision the final film to be. This is how it's different. I will say that people, if you are talking about including animation, people are always going to want to see animation before how that's going to be incorporated into the film before they give you money. Animation is expensive. So do anything you can to avoid animation. I also feel right now like animation is just kind of lazy. It's like, oh yeah, we'll tell the story and we'll animate it. We'll animate this part of it because we don't have that footage. So that's so many grant proposals. So if you could avoid that, don't do that. But if you're also like interweaving, if you're doing like a tapestry of a whole bunch of different elements, it's going to be much, much harder for you to get funding because that's executionally based. And people are going to want to, and again, I say this, whether it's a fiction project or a nonfiction project, people are going to want to see in your work sample and in your verbiage about the project, how those things are going to come together. And it makes it much harder to write about or to show in the work sample. And having said that, like all those things need to work together. There's another project that I'm producing right now that just got NEH funding. And you can collapse characters. When I say 3 characters, like, no, you can collapse characters. This film and what this particular director did is just find as many people to include in this and scholars and this and that and the other. And I'm like, pick 3 characters. If somebody else said something for the purpose of the treatment, then we can say this person said, we can collapse quotes into 3 characters. Nobody's going to go back and look and say, but you said, in the treatment you had, or in your proposal, you had Susan saying these things. But Muriel over there said this other quote. They're not going to do that. You just need to make the story that you're telling about your film make sense on paper.
Ooh, there's a lot in there. I want to just quickly go back to what you said about there's always a group of projects ahead of you and that you always have to be able to update.
Yep.
So my question is, how do you keep the project alive through that cycle when you're like, let's talk about independent documentary filmmaking. It's expensive and there's not a lot of money out there. So how do you keep those projects progressing and alive from one cycle of putting in the application so they're excited and they know about it to the next cycle when they see it again? How do you fund that progress? Is it, someone's personal passion project for a year? Is it, you have a little bit of money left over from funding from a different film or distribution money? Like what have you seen? I know it's probably a little different for every project, but how do you sustain, that gap year almost of like we're starting the fundraising cycle now.
Well, I mean, it's a different panel, and I'm happy to come back and talk about that. But the whole sustainability thing, and I've done a lot of sustainability panels. I don't like the word sustainability because I feel like it's aspirational, whether it's, climate change, or it's like you never achieve it. I think we need to have that conversation. That conversation is always an afterthought. I think you need to bake that into your planning for your film and your production for your film. If you need to make a living, then for God's sake, go and work in, start working in reality television or in doc series, and do that for 6 months, and then go off and work on your film for 6 months. With the money that you made on that, bake it in, because there's no way this whole grant system is not. It doesn't work for anybody. It just really doesn't. But I think the thing that always, and I'm not sure I'm staying in at this point, quite honestly. But I think I'm going to do something else. Film. There's a lot of things you can do in film, and that are not in this space. I think branded content's awesome. It's super satisfying for me to like get a good amount of money that I can actually pay my rent with, and do branded content and make a good little film in 6 weeks or 2 months and get paid for it, and then move on to the next thing. I mean, we have to like be real talk about that. I don't think that and I've had so many projects that were sure things at this point that end up dying on the vine. Like I did one with Ross Kaufman, who we developed a series, I don't remember how many years ago, 10, 15 years ago, that we had to decide between George Clooney and Brad Pitt as our executive producers. We did a great trailer. If I sent it to you guys now, you'd all be like, oh my God, that's amazing. I would watch that, because that's what everybody always says. CAA was repping it, and it didn't happen. So there's so much about this business that we don't control. But then I think the thing that keeps one going is the passion to tell this particular story. Like, that's it. That's all you've got, really, because it's not about the money. One thing I would say about budgets is that I am much more concerned about budgets that are too low than the budgets that are too high. I don't know what budgets are going to be coming out of COVID, but if you're not talking about a $700,000 budget, you're doing it all wrong. And you can always raise more money, but if people show me a budget that's too low, it's like, this is going to, nobody ever, Michaela heard me, I think, say this on an email chain earlier this week. Nobody buys a film because it's cheap. They buy it because it's good. And you cannot make a good film for $100,000 or $50,000 or even $300,000 these days. So unless you're really thinking about what it takes to make the film and to make a good film, and the production values are getting so much better. Like, I saw something today, there was something going around, maybe y'all saw it. This guy, what was it? It was, somebody sent it to me, and it was how to make a Netflix documentary. And it was about like this, it was a parody, but this guy, like, somebody ate his jam on toast in his house, and the only ones that were there were his mother and his brother. And he like, like pulled apart the drone shots and the this and the that and the music. And it was just like, and he was absolutely right. Like, but I think there's two things that I think things come down to is, learn to talk about the story in a way that people want to see that story, and that makes them as passionate about that story as you are. So bring the passion. And there was one more thing that just went out of my head, and I can't remember what it was, but it'll come back to me.
So I know the system isn't very robust, but I think it would be great just if you could quickly, I don't know, do you watch Game of Thrones?
Oh God, no, it was way too violent for me.
The opening credits scene of Game of Thrones, on how we sort of get like this overarching aerial view of the map, and we see like this kingdom here and this kingdom here and this kingdom here, and we don't actually really get into the series of it, but we just get a sense of it. Could you give us sort of that aerial roadmap of documentary grants and documentary funders, and the ones that I think, we're going to say the name, they're the players in the business,
Oh God. I would say, I mean, I think y'all know who all they are. I would say don't waste your time applying for grants that you ain't gonna get. I mean, I do that. And I don't know, and I will say I don't pretend to know right now what we're going to be like coming out of COVID. I think going into year 2 or 3, depending on how you look at it, they're like, I think a lot of funders or they're having a hard time raising money too. The festival thing is done. Oh, I know what I was going to say. Is think out of the box. And also the biggest thing that you need to think about is go back to, and this is what I've been advising people since we hit COVID, go back to the reason you wanted to make your film in the first place, and who the audience for your film is, and how you reach that audience. I mean, I was working in El Paso, I was working on a film in El Paso in 2019. I spent 7 months down there. And not once did anybody say to me, is it going to be in Sundance? Is it going to be at South by? Is it going to be, all they want to know is whether it was going to be on YouTube. So even like when you're putting together your plans for how you're going to hit them, and they don't care who won. They're not going to Google. And I'll use as an example, like Bo McGuire, who did a film called Socks on Fire. I had him in the IFP Doc Lab in 2018, and he actually won Tribeca in 2020. And the only thing he really got, and he had everybody attached to that film. Julie Goldman was executive producing. And the only thing he really got out of it last year was that Chris Evans called to tell, who was, I guess, the chair of the jury, the doc jury, called to tell him that he won. And as a gay boy from Alabama in a seersucker suit, that was really a great thing for Bo McGuire. He was over the moon. But it didn't do anything for his film. And actually, Tribeca this year actually screened in person the films that won last year. So it was much better for him. But I said to him, like, where's a gay kid in Alabama? Like, where are they going to see the film? Where do you think they're going to see the film? And the likelihood is, it's much more likely they're not watching Netflix. They don't have the money for Netflix. So if you just really drill down on the reason you made the film in the first place. I'm not somebody who's ever made a film to get Oscars or Emmys. And if you are, that's okay. Just like figure out just be clear about what your goals are for the film and where your audience is for the film and the essence of how you talk about the film. And that's like that's the stuff that's going to make all the difference in terms of you getting funding, again, whether it's a fictional film or whether it's a nonfiction film.
Wow. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. Thank you. I know that we have our Q&A panel up and running on our event platform. So I just want to let the audience who's watching know that if they have any questions, they can put it in the chat. I haven't seen any come through yet. I'm monitoring 2 screens at once. So I think just to be fair to Heidi's time, we will keep the question and answer open for the next 5-ish minutes. And if we don't get one, then we'll call it a night. And if we start getting questions that roll in, then we'll try and answer them as best as we can until the top of the hour.
Do you want to put the development? Do you want to put the development primer in the chat now, in case if people want to look at that, and then if they have any questions about that?
Yeah, that's a great idea. Give me 1 second. I'll pull that
Of course.
in.
Oh.
Hmm.
And while you're doing that, I'm going to talk to something else. Yes. There's two things because I'm looking at all my notes of what I wanted to make sure I got through. Do not ever use the word unprecedented. Unless you're COVID, you're not unprecedented. So don't say something is unprecedented. Particularly don't say access is unprecedented. And what people are looking for is not access necessarily, it's intimacy. It's that you've got something that nobody else can get. And what comes across in intimacy, access is like what happens when you get somebody to sign a friggin' release. Intimacy is like they are trusting you to tell their story. And there's a very big difference between the two. Also, you want to tell your story in terms of the emotional journey of your characters. It's not events based. And the way I think about filmic writing, first of all, I think some of the best filmic writing out there is New Yorker Magazine, because every time I read New Yorker Magazine, I see it as I see the article or whatever I'm reading as a film in my head. And I also talk about filmic reading is it's like life. Let me see. I haven't said this in a long time, so let me see if I can say this correctly. But that events in life are easy, but transitioning between events are hard. And that's what makes film writing. It's the transitioning between scenes, or when you're doing a 1 or 2 page synopsis, transitioning between whatever you're transitioning between. Also, you don't have to write in a certain style. It's like a film. You can write in the way that you're called to write. You can start writing in the way you're called to write. Like, it takes me a long time to write something. But also don't write to the word count. And I said this at the top of this, but I'll reiterate it. Like, go long and then like go back and cut, like separate the wheat from the chaff. Just like you would edit a film.
So don't write up for the word count, as in don't stop yourself. Keep writing past the word count and then go back and edit it till it gets to the word count. Because that's something I always struggle with those applications.
Yeah, write what you need to write to make it cohesive, and then go back and again, like it's like making a 2.5 hour rough cut and cutting it down to 90 minutes.
That makes sense. I've dropped the packet in.
Okay.
So,
and also, and one more thing, like just so I get through my greatest hits. Also understand the way when people are looking at stuff. First of all, the other thing about decks, let me throw this in here about decks. People do not read decks. So don't think you're better served by having a deck. Somebody at CIA, when I was pitching a project, was so happy to have like a 2-page black on white. I think it was like our synopsis. And you don't need to send everything to everybody to begin with. You send them like the synopsis and maybe the topic summary. And again, then that begets the next conversation. And then that begets the next conversation where you send them the budget. But Amanda LeBeau at CAA said, like, she was so happy to not see a $75,000 pitch deck that oversold a project. Just like, keep it simple, stupid. Everybody wants to know what the story is and who your characters are.
Yeah, and I wonder too, you know, these, like you said, they have a lot of different ways of absorbing pitch decks and looking at pitch decks. Should we start thinking about accessibility when it comes to pitch decks? You know, the size of the font, the colors of the pages, the way that you can read what's actually on there, you know?
I'm gonna say on that, not for the people that are funding.
Okay.
Not for the people that are funding. Like I I get the idea, but I think for the people that are funding stuff, I don't think you have to worry about that.
So question of what's an ideal deck length, number of slides? I think you were just
Um,
talking.
uh, no more than you have to put in the deck. Because if you're trying to get people to read your deck, the more slides you have, the harder it's going to get them to read it. Now, I was out with a project with anonymous content, which knows their shit, and our pitch deck ended up being 57 pages. And I can guarantee you that nobody ever read that pitch deck. But the last one I did, I think it was 13 pages. And you know what? Part of my email to people was like, hey, it clocks in at a lean 13 pages, which made them more likely to read it. But it was all like, and everybody loved that pitch deck because there was nothing extraneous in there. There was no superfluous information. It was like everything that was in there was something that they would want to know.
I guess on top of that, imagery, you know, if it's stand-in imagery versus real life imagery, like real, like, you know, do you make a note like this is a sample of imagery, or we're pulling from this inspiration of imagery, we have not yet shot it? Like, how much is too much information?
I think there you pull them out of it then. So I wouldn't do that. I mean, in that particular, the 13-page deck, we had very little to work with. There had been one shoot and it was all screen grabs, but it was all like, you know, it was pretty. Everybody was like super excited about the project. And again, and that's one that died on the vine, you know, just again, like I said, for the earlier one, and so it just happens. I mean, all of making movies is gambling on the horses as far as I'm concerned.
That sounds like a pretty good one liner too. Is that in there?
No, but it is. It's just like you can do your best stuff. And I mean, what I said before, passion is what you have to rely on. But I also just am like, you know what? I don't consider any of the projects that haven't gotten up of mine. I'm very proud of them. We put them together well. If they didn't go, that's, you know, the Brad Pitt, George Clooney one was ahead of its time. It's just like, I'm still so proud of those projects. I would never have not done them.
There's another question. Oh, okay, I want to actually add this one as our end question. So I'm going to jump in with my quick question.
Okay.
Define die on the vine. Like, when do you know it's time to let the project go? How do you communicate that? Like, what tends to be sort of the dying sort of like aspects of the project?
I do an interpretive dance around my apartment.
Burn some sage, let it
Yeah,
go.
exactly. I think it's flat out when you lose momentum. I mean, you know, you can't get excited about it anymore. Or I do find participants are much more difficult to deal with these days. But I think that's it. Like you just lose momentum.
Got it. And the question we're going to wrap with: what stories excite you?
Stories that are entertaining, because nobody wants to watch spinach right now. And I mean, I think that's the thing too, for everybody to think about is like coming out of COVID, what are people going to want to watch? Are they going to want to watch? I mean, commercial's the word right now, but commercial can still be social issue. You know, it can still do social good. But I mean, and I loved Hamilton. I've watched Hamilton like 50 times now, I think. But I think I can't say tomorrow. What excites me is a story, trans alpaca ranchers in rural Colorado going up against the militias. That's what excites me. Like, that gets back to what I said about the things that I can sell off of an article or where I know something's there. And as much as I probably, I'm going to sort of pivot to something else in the film space. Like if I found a film, if I know me and I will find something tomorrow that I read about that I'm just like, oh my God, I have to make this film. Because it's a great story and it's entertaining and people will want to watch it.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot to be left here to think about. Heidi, if people want to reach out to you, or if people want to follow you, or if people want to just like, learn more from you in any way, shape, or form that you're available to them, how would they be able to find you? How would they be able to get in contact with you? Or just, be able to learn more about the development package you sent them? Like what are some like easy, simple ways?
Best way is email, because I don't love social media. It takes too much time and it's so depressing. But Heidi at necessarypictures.us. So it's Heidi, Heidi at necessarypictures.us. And I'm happy, like, if you all want to send me decks or proposals or log lines or anything, or budgets or whatever to look at, I'm happy to do that. It may take me a little while because I'm on a couple of projects right now, so it may take me a little while to get to them, but I'm happy to, give feedback. Yeah.
That's so generous of you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome so much.
Yeah, thank you for joining us at MAMFest. I mean, obviously, having you be a part of this has been so, like, key, because a lot of people come here and they have projects that have already completed, but we don't necessarily have projects, thinking about how we got funding for those projects. But now that these projects have been premiering at festivals, and now these creators are sort of probably at a juncture where they're like, what's next? And of course, they're back to that drawing board. So, and that's where this value is so important: the grant writing, the fundraising, how you talk about your new project, how you talk about your projects.
And I want to say, I kind of mentioned this briefly, but like a lot of companies like learn to speak the language of brands. Those people have money out the wazoo. There's much easier ways to get films made, and a lot of brands are putting money into films these days, without, like, not product placement, but just because they want to be associated with the film that actually is part of, that matches their ethos. That's a good match, right? And this is, again, I use the word organic. So be organic about it. But to the extent that you are much better served right now at figuring out how to talk to corporate people than you are figuring out how to talk to Sundance or IDA or Ford Foundation, because they've got marketing budgets. You're going to put the same amount of energy into talking to Audi and getting $300,000 or $1 million out of Audi as you will about talking to Sundance and getting $25,000 9 months from now.
And there's the reality.
So I leave you with that. Yeah.
Heidi, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
You're welcome. Thank you. It's been super fun.
Yeah, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening. And for those of you who are watching, be sure to check out the rest of MAMFest. And we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
All right, y'all too. Bon weekend.
Have a good one.